In the summer of 1953, workers digging near a shallow bay in Yamaguchi Prefecture uncovered something that should not have existed in that quantity anywhere in Japan. Beneath the sand of the Doigahama coast lay skeleton after skeleton, more than 300 eventually, from a burial ground sealed for over 2,000 years. These were Yayoi period farmers, people who were supposed to fit neatly into a story scientists already understood. But when anthropologists measured the skulls, they grew uneasy. The bones were too tall, too narrow in the face, too different from the short, sturdy Jomon hunter-gatherers assumed to be the original people of the islands. Something had arrived in Japan that did not match the accepted story, and for 70 years, scientists tried to contain that anomaly inside a simple two-part explanation. Then, starting in 2021 and accelerating through 2024 and into 2026, a wave of genome sequencing tore that explanation apart, revealing the entire foundation of Japanese ancestry had been misunderstood. What researchers found inside thousands of genomes was so unexpected that leading population geneticists openly admitted the old model could no longer stand, a hidden third ancestry. Buried fragments of extinct human cousins linked to modern disease, neighboring villages living side by side with almost no genetic mixture for generations, and a migration story that unfolded not as one dramatic wave, but as a slow, uneven flood some communities avoided entirely while their neighbors were transformed. This is how the genetic origin of the Japanese people went from one of the most settled questions in human population history to one of its most urgent unresolved mysteries. For decades, the accepted explanation was called the dual structure model, clean enough to fit on a single page. Long before Japan existed as a nation, Jomon hunter-gatherers lived across the archipelago for thousands of years, fishing, foraging, and producing some of the earliest pottery ever made anywhere on Earth, dated to roughly 16,500 years ago. Then, beginning around the 10th or 9th century BCE, waves of rice farming migrants arrived from continental East Asia, tied to the Yayoi period, bringing wet field agriculture, metal tools, and denser villages. According to the model, these two populations mixed and produced the ancestors of nearly everyone living in Japan today, and for years it fit the archaeology and available genetic markers, becoming the textbook answer. Then scientists sequenced more than 3,000 complete Japanese genomes, reading roughly 3 billion DNA letters in each person rather than a few 100,000 scattered markers. When they mapped what they found, the two-part story did not simply need adjusting, it broke. Hidden inside those genomes was a third major ancestral signal with no clean place in the dual structure model. It was strongest in northeastern Japan, weakened moving west, and matched neither the island ancestry concentrated in Okinawa nor the continental ancestry strongest in western Japan. Japan, so often described as unusually homogeneous, was carrying a far deeper and more fractured history than anyone could see just by looking at modern people. Tucked inside the same data were 44 segments of DNA inherited not from any human population, but from Neanderthals and Denisovans. Extinct relatives, some of Japan's ancestors had interbred with tens of thousands of years earlier. Some statistically linked to modern conditions, including type 2 diabetes, coronary artery disease, rheumatoid arthritis, and prostate cancer. Rare genetic variants, largely ignored by older, cheaper studies, revealed migration patterns that common variants had smeared into invisibility. When scientists compared this map against actual ancient skeletons, they realized the formation of Japan was never one clean replacement or moment of mixture, but a long, uneven process where populations entered at different times, stayed separated in some regions for generations, mixed rapidly in others, and left traces still detectable in people alive today. The project behind this discovery was built around a database called JEWEL, the Japanese Encyclopedia of Whole Genome and Exome Sequencing Library. Researchers selected 3,256 individuals from Biobank Japan across 7 regions from Hokkaido in the north to Okinawa in the south. Rather than checking a limited panel of markers, the team performed high-depth whole genome sequencing on every participant, hunting for rare changes, preserving fine, local ancestry, among the largest whole genome studies ever done on a non-European population. Rare variants mattered because common variants spread widely over generations and lose geographic specificity, while a rare variant, first appearing in a small community, stays concentrated among its descendants far longer. Mapping thousands of these rare variants, researchers found participants separated into patterns tracking geography with startling precision. 3 broad ancestral components emerged, labeled using modern geographic shorthand: Jomon ancestry, Kansai ancestry, and Tohoku ancestry, describing where each reaches its highest concentration rather than where it literally originated. The Jomon-related component peaked in Okinawa at roughly 28.5% in the study's model, and dropped to its lowest, around 13.5% in western Japan. These are population averages, not fixed percentages, yet the gradient itself was striking. The Kansai-related component showed the strongest affinity to Han Chinese and other East Asian groups, strongest across Western Japan, while the Tohoku-related component showed connections to Northeast Asia and peaked in the Northeast. Together, these three overlapping signals supported what researchers called a tripartite origin, replacing the old two-part story with something far more layered. To understand why this mattered, we must go back further, long before Japan existed as a unified state. Modern humans are believed to have reached the archipelago by at least around 38,000 years ago. During colder glacial periods, sea levels dropped and coastlines extended outward, briefly narrowing the distance from the continent, though reaching every major island still required crossing open water. The earliest arrivals carried stone tool technology into a landscape of dense forest and shifting coastlines, and their genetic relationship to later populations remains difficult to reconstruct, since ancient DNA from this Paleolithic period is extraordinarily rare. By roughly 16,500 years ago, Jomon communities were producing some of the oldest pottery discovered anywhere on the planet, its name meaning cord marked, for patterns pressed into wet clay before firing. But the Jomon were never one unchanging tribe, frozen across 10,000 years. The term covers dozens of distinct communities across a long chain of islands in an enormous stretch of time, with diets and tools varying by region. For thousands of years, these communities thrived without the large-scale wet rice agriculture already reshaping continental East Asia. Then, gradually, that balance shifted. The beginning of the Yayoi period is still debated, since farming, metal tools, and population movement did not spread simultaneously, but researchers agree wet rice farming, bronze and iron technology, and new settlement patterns entered through or near northern Kyushu as early as the 10th or 9th century BCE and spread gradually eastward. Crucially, people themselves were moving, not just objects. Rice agriculture supported far larger, denser populations than hunting and gathering, but demanded coordinated labor, irrigation, and control over farmland, and villages grew larger, inequality became more visible, and conflict increased in some regions. The demographic advantage farming populations held meant even a migration beginning with relatively few people could, over centuries, become genetically dominant. The old model described this transformation as a straightforward mixture between Jomon and Yayoi migrants, and skeletal evidence initially supported that. Many Yayoi individuals from northern Kyushu and Yamaguchi, including the Doigahama skeletons, were taller with narrower, higher cheekbones than typical Jomon remains. Yet Yayoi individuals from northwestern Kyushu retained far more Jomon-like features, suggesting migration and mixture were uneven from the start. For a long time, this seemed like enough. But an ancient DNA study published in 2021 changed the shape of the argument. Researchers analyzed 12 ancient Japanese genomes from before and after farming arrived, finding Yayoi individuals carried Jomon-related ancestry mixed with Northeast Asian-related ancestry, while individuals from the later Kofun period showed an additional East Asian-related component, closer to modern Han Chinese, absent from the earlier Yayoi genomes. Researchers proposed modern mainland Japanese formed from three streams: Jomon hunter-gatherers, Northeast Asian-related migrants who arrived during the Yayoi transition, and a second, distinct wave of East Asian-related migration during the Kofun period of early state formation. The Kofun period began around the 3rd century CE, named for enormous burial mounds built for powerful elites, some shaped like keyholes and requiring staggering labor. Political authority expanded rapidly. Regional leaders formed alliances or were absorbed into stronger central control, and the early Japanese state took shape, aided by intense contact with Korea and China that brought new technologies, writing systems, craft skills, horses, weapons, and cultural practices. The 2021 study argued this transformation was accompanied by a substantial new pulse of East Asian ancestry, distinct from and later than the Yayoi migration. This became the tripartite model, seeming to solve the anomaly puzzling anthropologists since Doigahama. But 12 ancient genomes were never enough to prove how broadly this applied. Since ancient DNA survives unevenly, and a small sample could make one local population seem more representative than it truly was. The 2024 Jewel project approached the question from the opposite direction, starting with living genomes and asking whether the same three patterns were still detectable today. They were, distributed in exactly the gradient described earlier, strongest for Jomon ancestry in Okinawa in the north, strongest for the continental component in the west, and strongest for the northeastern signal in Tohoku. This explains why Okinawa and the Ryukyu Islands preserved more Jomon-related ancestry, having received far less later continental migration, and why Ainu populations in the far north also preserve unusually high Jomon-related ancestry, though the Ainu underwent their own later mixture, including with populations connected to the Okhotsk tradition, and should never be described as frozen Jomon survivors. Western Japan carried far more of the continental component, and showed greater affinity to Han Chinese-related populations connected to repeated migration during state formation, roughly between 250 and 794 CE, when Western Japan faced the Korean peninsula directly along the main routes linking the emerging state with continental courts, leaving a stronger signal there than in the distant northeast. The northeastern component was strongest in Tohoku and decreased moving west. Public explanations cautiously connected it to Northeast Asian-related ancestry, and some mentioned the historical Emishai communities, who resisted or remained outside the early Japanese state for centuries. But the component should never be treated as the literal signature of one historically named people, since Emishi was a shifting political and cultural label, not a genetically defined population. The ancestry may reflect older Northeast Asian populations, Jomon-descended groups with their own continental admixture, or several communities later grouped under one convenient label. This was the most shocking result of the Jewel Project. The third ancestry was never a tiny trace hidden in rare bones. It was distributed clearly across the entire modern population, following a precise geographic gradient anyone could map. The population had not been blended into perfect uniformity, and regional history remained visible even after more than 1,000 years of political unity, internal migration, urbanization, and modern mass transportation. A second landmark study in 2024 expanded the picture further, merging Biobank Japan data from 171,287 people with 22 ancient genomes. It again found the tripartite model described populations throughout the archipelago, identified 132 variants predicting Jomon-related ancestry, and validated the model with independent datasets, involving more than 250,000 participants in total, one of the most validated findings in East Asian population genetics. The medical implications became even more startling once researchers turned to archaic human DNA. Every non-African population carries some Neanderthal ancestry, from early modern humans interbreeding with Neanderthals after leaving Africa, and many Asian and Oceanian populations also carry Denisovan-related ancestry, from a mysterious archaic population identified largely through DNA from a single finger bone found in a Siberian cave. These segments are usually small today, broken apart by recombination over tens of thousands of years, though some persist because they were neutral or not harmful enough to be removed. The Japanese genomes contained 44 archaic segments, statistically linked to complex modern traits, most unique to or characteristic of East Asian populations. One Denisovan-derived segment sat within a region associated with type 2 diabetes risk, possibly influencing response to certain treatments. 11 Neanderthal-derived segments were linked with coronary artery disease, rheumatoid arthritis, prostate cancer, and other conditions. This does not mean Neanderthals caused modern disease. A single segment only slightly alters risk alongside thousands of other variants and environmental factors. But it matters because most large genetic studies have focused on people of European descent, and medical risk scores trained on those genomes often perform poorly elsewhere. A detailed Japanese reference linked with clinical data can improve precision medicine while revealing population history at once. Just when the tripartite model appeared secure, a single high-quality ancient genome reopened the debate. Researchers sequenced the complete genome of a young woman recovered from that same Doigahama burial ground, labeled ST-1604, who stood around 149 centimeters tall with features unlike typical Jomon remains, matching the anomaly that had puzzled anthropologists for 7 decades. Her genome carried Jomon-related, East Asian-related, and Northeast Asian-related ancestry at once, seeming to confirm the 3-part model. But when scientists searched for the closest match to her continental ancestry, modern Koreans showed the closest similarity of any non-Japanese population tested. This detail created a crucial alternative explanation. Modern and ancient Korean populations already carry both East Asian and Northeast Asian-related ancestry within themselves, meaning Japanese genomes could display 3 components without requiring 3 separate source populations, or 2 distinct waves of migration centuries apart. A single population from Korea already carrying both continental components could have entered during Yayoi and continued arriving through Kofun, mixing with Jomon communities gradually. In the Doigahama study, a simpler 2-way model using only Jomon-related and Korean-related ancestry fit the data remarkably well. With no strong evidence, the more complex 3-way model explained it better. This distinction matters enormously. 3 components inside a genome do not automatically prove 3 separate migrations by 3 isolated peoples, since a single migrant population can already be internally mixed before it arrives anywhere new. If people from Korea already carried both northern and southern continental ancestry combined, their arrival could produce the same 3-part pattern through mixture with Jomon communities alone, without any separate wave during Kofun at all. The massive 2024 study clearly revealed 3 components. The Doigahama genome challenged the assumption each must correspond to its own migration. The debate grew more fascinating in 2026, when researchers published whole genomes from 4 Yayoi individuals in northwestern Kyushu, a region close to Korea long treated as the primary migration gateway. The genomes were astonishingly diverse. 2 individuals showed clear mixture between Jomon and continental ancestry. 2 others, a child and an adult woman from the nearby Nashiko site, were genetically almost entirely Jomon-related, despite living during the same period when rice farming and continental culture were already thriving nearby. Cultural labels and genetic ancestry simply did not match up. A person could live during the Yayoi period, use tools classified as Yayoi, and still descend almost entirely from local Jomon communities, while another, in the same region and time, carried substantial mixed ancestry. Farming communities and communities descended from Jomon ancestors may have lived side by side for generations, trading and occasionally marrying, without necessarily blending genetically at the same pace everywhere. The 2026 researchers estimated admixture in northwestern Kyushu began just under 2,600 years ago, continuing steadily across generations rather than instantly. Across several populations, estimated mixture dates range roughly from 2,600 to 1,900 years before present, a gradual process across centuries rather than one sudden invasion. Yayoi individuals from northwestern Kyushu retained more Jomon ancestry overall than those from northern Kyushu and Yamaguchi, despite sitting closer to Korea, showing geography alone did not determine genetic impact. Migrants may have entered through specific ports while bypassing nearby coastal communities. Local population size, marriage customs, and access to farmland could all change how quickly ancestry spread. This newer evidence does not erase the massive genome study that started this debate. It sharpens what its findings mean. Modern Japanese people carry 3 clearly detectable ancestral components, and that result remains robust across every large dataset. What remains debated is the historical process behind them, whether Jomon ancestry combined with 2 distinct continental influxes, one during Yayoi and a separate one during Kofun, or with a single population already carrying both Northeast Asian and East Asian ancestry, followed by continued gradual migration. The truth may include elements of both. Ancient DNA remains too limited to settle it, since Japan's warm, humid climate destroys genetic material, and the Korean peninsula around 3,000 years ago also lacks enough ancient genomes for confident comparison. The Ainu and Ryukyuan peoples also prevent any overly simple national origin story. Both preserve significantly more Jomon-related ancestry than mainland Japanese populations, yet neither should be called a living fossil frozen since the Paleolithic era. The Ainu formed through Jomon ancestry, mixing with later northern influences, including the Okhotsk cultural tradition, while Ryukyuan populations experienced their own isolation, maritime contact, and later gene flow from the mainland. Their higher Jomon-related ancestry reflects a different demographic history, not an unbroken copy of one ancient population. Even within mainland Japan, the Jewel data revealed fine-scale structure few expected to find this late. Tohoku, Kanto, Chubu, Kansai, Kyushu, Hokkaido, and Okinawa do not carry identical ancestry proportions. Centuries of internal movement have softened regional differences, but never fully removed them, and patterns remain strong enough to reliably emerge across thousands of genomes. This challenges the popular image of Japan as an unusually uniform nation. Every region is the product of ongoing mixture rather than isolated purity, structure inside one interconnected population, not 3 genetically pure peoples secretly living invisibly within modern Japan. There is, in the end, no single Jomon gene, no Yayoi gene, no Kofun gene, no Emishi gene, and no singular Japanese gene waiting to be discovered in the genome. Researchers identify ancestry only by comparing statistical patterns across millions of variants simultaneously, and the labels are models built from whatever reference populations happen to be available, likely to change as more ancient genomes are discovered. A component currently called Tohoku may later be split into several older sources, and one modeled as Han-related may turn out closer to some unsampled population from Korea or coastal China. The percentages should never be treated as precise, fixed measures of identity. The overall geographic gradient is far more secure than any single percentage. Jomon-related ancestry is consistently higher in Okinawa and lower across western mainland Japan, no matter which model researchers apply. The most honest picture of Japanese genetic origins is not a simple family tree with 3 clean branches. It resembles an entire river system. One deep, ancient stream flows from Jomon-related populations that survived tens of thousands of years of relative isolation across the islands. Continental streams entered primarily through the Korean peninsula, carrying wet rice, agriculture, and ancestry, already shaped by both northern and southern East Asian histories, later intensifying during the formation of the early Japanese state. These streams met at different points in time and in different proportions across regions, producing distinct channels still traceable inside modern DNA today. And beneath them lie even older fragments, Neanderthal and Denisovan segments that entered the ancestors of East Asians tens of thousands of years before anyone reached Japan. A single modern Japanese genome is therefore never merely a record of Japan alone. It is a sweeping record of migrations across Africa, Eurasia, East Asia, the Korean Peninsula, and the islands, unfolding across tens of thousands of years of human history. The massive DNA study at the heart of this story did not ultimately discover that Japanese people descended from one single shocking foreign source hidden somewhere in the past. It discovered the very idea of one clean source was itself the fundamental mistake all along. Modern Japanese ancestry formed gradually through continuity and repeated migration, through isolation and sustained contact, through local survival, alongside repeated waves of new arrival. The Jomon were never completely replaced. Continental migrants were never a single, uniform people moving as one. The Yayoi transition clearly did not unfold identically in every region. The Kofun state itself was built during a period of continued movement from the continent, rather than one decisive founding event. And the genetic map that has now emerged still faithfully follows the ancient geography of these long-forgotten events. Perhaps the strongest proof of all comes from the people of northwestern Kyushu themselves. Around 24 centuries ago, some individuals there already carried mixed Jomon and continental ancestry, while others in that same cultural period and region remained almost entirely Jomon descended, despite occupying the region closest to the migration route. History had not yet blended them into one uniform population, and their preserved genomes capture that unfinished process while it was still happening. Centuries later, those regional differences folded into a broader mainland Japanese profile. Yet Jewel can still detect precisely where those ancient layers were once strongest, buried quietly inside the DNA of people living in Japan today. So what, in the end, was the true genetic origin of the Japanese people? The honest answer depends on what the word origin is meant to describe. If it means the oldest ancestry that survived continuously within the islands, Jomon-related lineage remains essential. If it means the changes that brought rice farming and transformed society, migrants connected to the Korean Peninsula become essential instead. If it means the ancestry associated with state formation and intensified continental contact, later East Asian-related migration becomes essential as well. No single group can be removed without making the modern population genetically impossible to explain. The tripartite model gives a powerful statistical description of the DNA itself. The competing Korean-related two-way model gives an equally compelling explanation for how those continental components arrived. Additional Kofun and Jomon genomes could finally reveal whether later migration changed the population everywhere at once, or mainly within political centers, and how genetically different the islands already were before farming arrived. Until then, the modern Japanese genome remains a map showing several roads clearly, while leaving some starting points hidden. It shows a deep island lineage strongest at the southern and northern edges of the country, continental ancestry heavily concentrated in the west, and a distinct northeastern pattern steadily declining from east to west. It preserves genuine fragments inherited from Neanderthals and Denisovans, along with rare variants shaped by centuries of local population history. The resulting map is detailed enough to completely overturn the old textbook story that stood unquestioned for decades, yet still not detailed enough to fully close the case. Scientists set out to sequence more than 3,000 complete genomes, expecting to finally clarify exactly where the Japanese people came from. Instead, they discovered that the closer they looked, the less Japan resembled any single population formed in any single event. Every answer they uncovered opened another hidden layer underneath it. Jomon diversity hiding beneath Yayoi culture, Korean-related ancestry hiding beneath the celebrated three-component model, archaic human DNA hiding beneath modern-day health outcomes, regional histories hiding quietly beneath centuries of national unity. The people of Japan are not the simple descendants of one tribe, one migration, or one defining moment in history. They are the living result of populations who crossed dangerous stretches of open water, survived long isolation, adopted foreign agricultural practices, built powerful states, resisted those same states from the margins, moved back and forth through Korea and China, settled remote islands, and mixed unevenly across thousands of years. The old story claimed that two peoples met and simply created Japan between them. The new genetic evidence makes clear the real history was always far more complicated. At least 3 distinct ancestry components clearly survive inside modern Japanese genomes today, yet even those components may still be hiding several separate migrations and already mixed source populations underneath them. The DNA has finally revealed the underlying structure. The actual human beings responsible for parts of that structure are still waiting to be found, and somewhere beneath a quiet rice field, deep inside a coastal cave or inside a museum collection that has never once been sequenced, one ancient skeleton may still be holding the missing piece capable of changing this entire story all over again.